The sun was dying over Wyoming, bleeding crimson across the endless grassland. October winds swept through the sage, carrying the scent of winter, and the far-off mountains wrapped in purple shadow. Thomas Hale stood on the porch of his weathered ranch house, watching the light fade. He did that every evening, same as he'd done for the 3 years since his parents passed. At 35, Thomas had the lean, hard look of a man who'd spent more time with cattle than people. His hands were scarred from barbed wire and rope burns. His face was lined by sun and solitude. The Broken Wheel Ranch stretched behind him, 2,000 acres of stubborn grass and harder dreams. His father had built it with sweat and grit. His mother had softened it with curtains and flowers. Now the curtains hung gray with dust, and the garden was nothing but wild prairie again. He didn't need a wife. He'd given up on that notion long ago, after Sarah Mackenzie ran off with a banker from Cheyenne. What he needed was a cook, someone who could make beans taste like food and keep coffee hot through the long winter ahead. His last cook, old Miguel, had left in September, claiming his bones couldn't take another Wyoming freeze. Thomas couldn't blame him. He'd posted a simple notice in town. Cook wanted room, board, and fair wages. Apply at Broken Wheel Ranch, T. Hale. That morning, he'd ridden into Morrison's general store to check for replies. He expected maybe a widow or an older woman looking for steady work. What he didn't expect was Clara Mayfield. She was waiting in the dusty lobby of the Frontier Inn, a single carpet bag at her feet, a worn letter in her gloved hands. Even in that dim, smoky room, she stood out like a dove among crows. Not painted or flashy like saloon girls, but quiet and proper. Her dark hair pulled into a simple knot, her gray traveling dress neat despite wear, a cameo pinned at her throat. "Miss Mayfield?" Thomas asked, removing his hat. "I'm Thomas Hale. You answered about the cook position." She looked up, her eyes gray and clear as storm clouds. "Yes, Mr. Hale. I can cook, clean, and mend. I've managed a household before." He studied her. She looked too young to be a widow, too refined to be desperate. What was a woman like her doing out here, 1,000 miles from where women like her usually belonged? "The ranch is remote," he warned. 20 miles from town, and winter's coming on hard. It's not an easy life. "I'm not looking for easy, Mr. Hale." Her eyes didn't waver. "I'm looking for honest work and a place where questions aren't asked about things that don't concern the quality of my cooking." That should have been warning enough. But Thomas had lived long enough to know everyone west of the Mississippi carried secrets. He had his own. "Can you make biscuits?" he asked. "Light as clouds," she replied. "Coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe." For the first time in years, Thomas almost smiled. "When can you start?" "Today, if you'll have me." By sundown, they were riding toward the ranch. The journey was quiet. 20 long miles of wind and sage and silence. Clara sat straight on the wagon seat, her posture perfect, hands folded in her lap. Thomas tried small talk, pointed out landmarks, mentioned the cattle herds, spoke of the valley ahead, but she only nodded or answered in single words. As the air turned colder, he noticed her shivering in her thin shawl. "There's a buffalo robe under the seat," he offered. "I'm fine, thank you," she said, though her voice trembled. He pulled the robe out anyway and laid it across her lap without a word. She stiffened at first, then slowly pulled it up to her chin. "Thank you," she murmured, softer this time. The sun was nearly gone when they crested the ridge. Below them, the Broken Wheel Ranch lay spread across the valley. The main house, barn, bunkhouse, and a few sheds scattered in the dying light. It looked peaceful, but Thomas knew better. The silence of the land was heavy and sharp as a blade. "It's remote," Clara said at last. "That bother you?" "No," she said after a long pause. "Remote is what I need." They reached the ranch as the first stars came out. The house was dark and cold. Thomas lit lanterns while Clara stood in the doorway, taking it all in, the rough furniture, the layer of dust, the long silence that had settled over the place. "Your room's upstairs, first door on the right," he said, setting her bag down. "Kitchen's through there. Pump works fine, though the water's cold." I'll get a fire going." She took off her gloves, finger by finger. "When did you last eat a proper meal, Mr. Hale?" He blinked. "Can't rightly say." "Then I'll start tonight. Show me the pantry." Within an hour, the kitchen glowed warm, and something that smelled like heaven simmered on the stove. Thomas sat at the table, watching her move. She worked with calm precision. Sleeves rolled, hair pinned neatly, every motion deliberate. When she set a plate before him, beef, carrots, potatoes, and biscuits that steamed when broken open, he took a bite and closed his eyes. "It's good," he said quietly, and immediately felt foolish. "Eat," she replied with a faint smile. "You look like a man who's forgotten how." Quote, after supper, she poured 2 cups of black coffee and sat across from him. "Tell me about the ranch," she said. "How many men? What supplies you have? What you expect from me?" So he told her. 4 hands on payroll, a smokehouse half full, winter feed tight, cattle thin after a bad summer. As he spoke, her expression stayed thoughtful, serious, focused. "And what about you, Mr. Hale?" she asked when he finished. "Your habits?" "Up before dawn. Coffee first thing. I'm not particular about food. Been making do with whatever's quick." He hesitated. "What about you, Miss Mayfield? Anything I should know?" Her face hardened a little. "I cook, I clean, I keep to myself." "That's all you need to know." The sharpness of her tone stung, but Thomas recognized the sound of someone guarding their pain. "Fair enough," he said softly. She rose, gathering dishes. "I'll need a few things from town next week. Spices, lamp oil, some fabric for curtains." He nodded. "Write a list, so I'll fetch it." Quote. As she turned to leave, lamplight caught her face, and for a brief second he saw something behind her calmness. Not fear exactly, but sorrow, old and deep. "Thank you for the work," she said. "I mean to earn my keep." After she went upstairs, Thomas sat alone in the kitchen. The fire crackled low, throwing shadows across the walls. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel empty. Outside, the wolves began their nightly song, wild and haunting across the dark hills. He looked toward the ceiling, where faint footsteps moved above. The ranch had needed a cook, yes, but tonight, for reasons he couldn't name, Thomas Hale felt the faint stirrings of something more, something warm and dangerous that had nothing to do with food. The first week taught Clara Mayfield what real hardship meant. Each dawn came with frost on the window glass and air so cold it made her breath visible. The water in her wash basin froze solid overnight. She rose before daylight, layered her dresses for warmth, and hurried downstairs to battle the chill that clung to every corner of the ranch house. The stove was her first opponent. It smoked when overfed, died when underfed, and had to be coaxed into life like a stubborn mule. But Clara was patient. By the time Thomas and his men returned from the morning rounds, the kitchen was warm, and the smell of coffee filled the air. The ranch hands were rough men, but polite. Jake, the oldest, spoke little but nodded thanks over every meal. The Texas brothers, Sam and Pete, teased each other constantly, but treated Clara with respect. Carlos, Miguel's nephew, was young and cheerful, always quick to lend a hand. They called her ma'am and kept their eyes low, though their glances said what their mouths didn't. "What's a woman like her doing out here?" She ignored the looks and worked. From sunrise to dark, her hands never stopped, hauling water, scrubbing floors, baking bread, mending shirts, feeding men who barely spoke but always cleaned their plates. When Thomas passed through the kitchen, she kept her tone even and businesslike. He did the same. They had an unspoken agreement. No questions about the past, no talk of anything beyond work. But Thomas noticed things. He noticed how her gloves hid bandaged palms, how she fought the rusty well pump with raw hands that bled through the fabric. He noticed she never complained. On the third evening, he appeared in the kitchen doorway, a small tin of salve in his hand. "For your hands," he said. "They're fine." "No, they're not." His voice was firm but kind. "City skin won't last a Wyoming winter. Use it." She hesitated, then took the tin. "Thank you." As he turned to leave, she added quietly, "You're a stubborn man, Mr. Hale." His lips twitched, so they say. The wind was another enemy. It moaned through every crack in the house, slipping under doors, carrying dust that settled on everything. Clara learned to stop fighting it. Clean in Wyoming was never more than a moment between dust storms. The first real storm came suddenly. One minute, the sky was clear blue. The next, it turned the color of rust. The wind howled, and the air thickened with grit. Clara barely made it inside before the dust hit like a solid wall. The house shook as if angry at being buried. For hours they could do nothing but wait. When the storm finally passed, Thomas and the men stumbled in, covered head to toe in red dirt. Clara had coffee waiting. Jake grinned through the dust. "Welcome to Wyoming, ma'am." That night, when the men had gone to the bunkhouse, she sat at the kitchen table, her strength finally giving out. Quiet tears fell. Not of fear, but exhaustion. She had left behind a world of fine manners and polite cruelty. She had come west for peace and work, but she hadn't expected the land itself to test her so fiercely. Then she heard music. A fiddle, faint and mournful, coming from the main room. The tune was slow, old, full of longing and memory. She rose and followed the sound. Thomas stood by the cold fireplace, eyes closed, bow gliding across strings worn with use. He didn't notice her at first. When he finished, she said softly, "That was beautiful." He looked up, startled. "Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't. It's sad." Quote. He nodded. "Most things worth remembering are." She thought of her mother's piano, sold to pay debts. "I used to play too," she said. "Sing, mostly." "You should again." She smiled faintly. "Not much demand for singing cooks." "There's demand enough here," he said, then turned back to the fire. After that night, something shifted between them. The silences grew less heavy. She found herself humming while she worked. Sometimes, when she thought she was alone, she sang softly, lullabies her grandmother had taught her. One evening, as she kneaded bread, her voice rose clearer, stronger. "Sleep, my child, and peace attend thee." All through the night, when she finished, the kitchen seemed strangely still. She turned and froze. Thomas stood in the doorway, watching, his face unreadable, eyes dark and intent. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't realize." "Don't apologize," he said quietly. "It was beautiful. What language was that?" "Welsh." "My grandmother's songs." He nodded slowly. "You should sing whenever you want. This house has been too quiet too long." Quote. He left without another word, boots echoing on the stairs. But that night, when Clara lay awake listening to the wind, she thought she heard footsteps pause outside her door. And the next evening, though she told herself not to, she sang again. Winter deepened. Snow dusted the hills, and the nights grew longer. The ranch settled into rhythm. Days of work, evenings by the fire. Sometimes Thomas played his fiddle. Sometimes Clara read aloud from the few books his mother had left behind. They rarely spoke of themselves, but they learned each other in small ways. Clara noticed how Thomas touched the photograph of his parents every morning before heading out. How he always gave the ranch hands the largest portions at supper. How he stayed up late checking ledgers by firelight, worry etched into his face. And Thomas noticed her too. How she stretched flour and beans into feasts, how her laughter came rare but warm, how her singing could soften even the hardest day. One evening she found a letter in the pocket of his coat while mending it. It wasn't her habit to pry, but the paper slipped out on its own. The words caught her eye before she could look away. "I understand your anger, Tom, but Sarah is my wife now." She folded it quickly and tucked it back, heart aching for a wound that wasn't hers. That night she sang a different song, slower, deeper, full of loss and forgiveness. Thomas sat alone by the fire, listening. He didn't know she sang for him. She didn't know he played for her, but somehow, between music and silence, they began to heal each other. By the last days of October, the first real snow came. The cattle huddled close to the barns, the air sharp as glass. Clara worked beside Thomas, hauling feed, patching drafty windows, laughing when the wind whipped her hair loose. That night, as snow tapped against the windows, they ate supper by the fire instead of in the kitchen. The flames threw soft light across her face, and Thomas found himself staring longer than he should. "This place," he said quietly, "it breaks people, even strong ones. Takes everything and gives little back." Quote. She looked at him steadily. "Would it have changed anything if you'd told me that before I came?" He considered it. "No. I don't suppose it would." She smiled faintly. "Then I guess we're both too stubborn to quit." As she rose to clear the dishes, she hesitated and laid a hand on his shoulder, gentle and brief. "We'll manage, Thomas." He looked up sharply, his name on her lips stirring something fierce and unfamiliar in him. "Thomas," she repeated, softer. Outside, snow began to fall harder, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, by the glow of the fire, a lonely rancher and a woman with too many secrets found themselves warming to something neither had planned or dared to name. The storm came 3 days before Christmas, a blizzard fierce enough to make the world vanish in white. When Clara woke that morning, her window was rimmed with ice, and the house groaned under the wind's weight. She dressed fast, breath clouding in the air, and hurried to the kitchen. The stove had gone cold. The water bucket was frozen solid. Thomas was already up, face half hidden under a layer of frost, his coat white from snow. "Lost sight of the herd," he said. "They've drifted toward the north pasture. If they reach the gulch, we'll lose half by morning." "In this storm?" she asked, her voice catching. "No choice. They'll freeze if we don't move them." He gulped the coffee she'd managed to heat and pulled on his gloves. The men came stamping in from the bunkhouse, their faces already raw from cold. Jake, Sam, Pete, and Carlos, all bundled to the ears. Clara filled their cups and pressed warm biscuits into their hands. Thomas's eyes met hers across the table. "Keep the lamps burning," he said. "We'll follow the light back." Then they were gone, swallowed by the white void beyond the porch. For hours, Clara fought the cold alone. She kept the fire roaring, the coffee boiling, soup simmering on the stove. Every few minutes she checked the window, but the world outside was nothing but a wall of snow. The wind screamed like a living thing, shaking the shutters and howling down the chimney. Noon came. Then, afternoon. Still no sign of them. She tried to read, to sew, to pray, but her thoughts always turned to the men out there, and to Thomas. Somewhere beyond that white curtain, he was fighting for his cattle, maybe for his life. By 4 o'clock, fear took over reason. She threw on his mother's heavy buffalo coat, tied a rope around her waist, and fastened the other end to the porch rail. "Just to the barn," she told herself. She stepped into the storm, and the world disappeared. Snow hit her face like needles. Wind roared so loud she couldn't hear her own cries. She could barely see her feet. The rope went taut in her hands, her only link to life. She made it maybe 20 paces before panic seized her. The barn was nowhere in sight. Every direction looked the same. White, endless, cold. She turned back, following the rope hand over hand until she found the porch again, gasping and half blind. Inside, she collapsed by the fire, shaking. Now she understood how quickly this land could kill. Night fell. Still no riders. She lit every lamp she could find and set them in the windows. Then, with nothing else left to do, she remembered her grandmother's words. "When the night is too deep to pray, sing." So she sang. She sang every Welsh hymn she knew, every lullaby she could recall. Her voice rose above the wind, carrying through cracks in the walls, into the storm. She didn't care how raw her throat grew. If the men were lost out there, maybe, just maybe, they'd hear her. It was full dark when she heard the barn door slam. She ran outside, lantern in hand, heart racing. Through the swirling snow, shapes appeared, horses first, then men. Frozen, staggering, but alive. Thomas led them, his face white with frost, his eyes glazed from exhaustion. They stumbled into the kitchen, half frozen, their clothes stiff as armor. Clara worked without thinking, tearing off boots, pouring hot coffee, wrapping hands in towels. Jake's beard was full of ice, Sam and Pete shook like leaves, and Carlos's lips were blue. "Where's Carlos?" she asked suddenly, realizing he was missing. "Coming," Thomas rasped, "stayed behind, calf stuck in a drift." A moment later, the door burst open. Carlos stumbled in, carrying a half-dead calf wrapped in his coat. He dropped to his knees near the stove, gasping. Clara grabbed feed sacks and began rubbing the calf's legs until it kicked weakly. Hours later, the men thawed. The calf lived. The storm still howled, but the fire roared higher, and life returned to the house. Thomas sat near the stove, hands wrapped in bandages. Frostbite had turned his fingers pale, and pain lined his face. "You saved us," he said hoarsely. She blinked. "What do you mean?" "We were lost," he said. "Couldn't see a thing." Then Jake heard singing. Said it was coming from the valley. We followed it. His eyes found hers. "You sang us home." Clara tried to smile, but tears blurred her vision. "I just did what I could." Thomas shook his head. "You did more than that." They sat in silence, firelight flickering across their faces. Finally he asked, "Why'd you come here, Clara? What were you running from?" For a long moment she said nothing. Then, quietly, "A man, back east. My father's business partner. He wanted to marry me after father died. I refused. He didn't take it kindly." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Did he hurt you?" "Not in ways that show," she said softly. "When I left, he spread lies, said I'd stolen from him, said I was ruined. So I came west to start over." He looked at her for a long time, the firelight catching the anger in his eyes. "If he ever comes here—" "He won't," she said. "Men like him don't chase what they've already broken. Then he's a fool." She met his gaze. "You don't understand. Back there, a woman's name is everything. Once it's gone for good." "Names don't mean much out here," Thomas said quietly. "Only truth does. And I know yours." Her throat tightened. "Do you?" He nodded. "You're the kind of woman who sings men home through a blizzard." That was all. No grand speeches, no promises, just truth. She reached across the small space between them and took his bandaged hand. His fingers were rough and clumsy, but he held on tight. Outside, the wind eased. Inside, the air warmed. Something new took root in the silence between them. Fragile, dangerous, but real. When dawn came, the storm had passed. The world outside was white and pure, the ranch half buried under snow. The men went out to dig paths and check the herd, their laughter rising in the cold air. In the kitchen, Clara kneaded dough with bandaged hands, humming softly. Thomas leaned in the doorway, watching her. "You plan on singing every morning now?" he teased. "Depends," she said with a smile. "You plan on listening?" "Always." That night, as stars shone over the frozen land, Thomas played his fiddle by the fire. Clara joined in with her voice, low and sweet. The house, once silent and cold, now pulsed with warmth and music. The lonely rancher had wanted a cook. The woman had only wanted a place to belong. But in the end, they found something neither had expected. Love that grew like fire in winter, slow but sure, bright enough to light the darkest nights. Outside, the wolves sang in the distance, but inside the Broken Wheel Ranch, two hearts finally rested, no longer lost, no longer alone.